Hey, good afternoon. Welcome to today's edition of the Coal Seam. I'm Chris Hamilton. I'll be your host over the course of the next half hour or so. Joining me in the studio today is Mr. Jason Bostic, Senior Vice President with the West Virginia Coal Association. And Jason's here going to be presenting some of the most recent numbers on production employment trends and talk a little bit about where our coal's going to and some of the factual information that we talk about from time to time on the program. We're also going to be talking about some current events that are going on within the industry. And Jason, thanks for coming by. Seems like there's a lot going on. Some of it's good, a whole lot bad, but just seems like there's a lot of activity, a lot of interest in coal and energy generally right now, locally, domestically, internationally. Everybody wants to know about coal and where's the future for coal here in West Virginia and around the world. And of course, we're doing pretty good right now, a little bit better than we were a year ago. And compared to other parts of the nation, probably better than most.
We are. Our West Virginia is blessed with having one of the most diverse coal bases of any state in the country. We have metallurgical and thermal coal, and we also have different grades of both of those. In fact, we're one of the few places in the world that can supply all four grades of met coal. But what that's allowed for us to do, as other states' productions have been relatively steady, whether it's Wyoming or Kentucky or some of the other states, there's a huge demand both domestically and internationally for both forms of our coal, both thermal and metallurgical. And the energy world is still in a state of turmoil. The energy markets and demand have never really recovered from the aggression in Ukraine and Europe. And now you tack onto that, the most recent geopolitical upset in the Middle East, which will obviously have an influence on oil and natural gas prices. And I think we're just weeks away, maybe a month away from seeing another upheaval in the energy market that may very well drive prices back to all-time record highs and get demand back to where it was, almost this time last year when coal supplies were very, very short throughout the world.
The other thing that happens when you have political unrest and when you have, conflict like we have right now, of course, in the Middle East, but as we've had with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, it tends to reset your priorities. And all of a sudden there's more and more attention to things like national defense, security, and of course, we have this ongoing issue about border protection and security. But it seems like everybody's priorities, when there's concern, when there's fear, everybody's priorities get reset.
They do. And one of the things that we see today that started with the invasion of Ukraine is a concern by our allies in Europe and other countries around the world about buying their energy from their enemies. Russia was the #1 supplier of energy to Europe, whether it was natural gas or even coal. And I think when you have political upsets like that, all of a sudden countries start to look at their energy supplies, and while they may be close and somewhat more convenient, is it beneficial in the long run to subsidize an aggressor or an adverse power and fuel their war machine by purchasing their energy? I think every single country in Europe, Germany, and the parts of Western Europe especially were enlightened to that fact when Russia invaded Ukraine.
Every war general knows that if you want to cripple a nation or a country, you cut off its fuel supplies, its power sources. And that tends to slow things and bring things to a halt pretty quick.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think
and same as when you hear these sanctions. A lot of those sanctions are aimed at the importation of fuel.
Yes. And as Europe, despite the backlash against Russia for the invasion of Ukraine, Europe's ability to respond to that was compromised by the fact that they could not arrange for alternative sources of energy, whether it was coal or gas. And we are only now getting to the point where, speaking of our business, where coal supplies from Russia have been totally supplanted by coal from other places, and a lot of that's coming from the United States.
But here we are sitting here, moving towards the end of, calendar year 2023, and West Virginia coal's doing pretty well today. I mean, we still hear, in view of this, this barrage of negativity or transitioning away from coal. So ever since the president has come out and talked about transitioning away from fossil energy, there's a lot of media outlets that accentuate or just add to that and keep it stirred. But as we know, and as your energy experts know, you just can't meet those decarbonization targets in the accelerated time, that the president has said time after time. You can give it an attempt, but there's just no realistic commercially available alternative.
There's not, Chris. And the thing that I think is so telling for us here in West Virginia, because of our locality and our familiarity with the export coal market, is while we're espousing those platitudes here at home about closing power plants and decarbonizing the steel industry, as you know, we could ship every single ton of coal that we could produce overseas. The demand is that strong. Mm-hmm. And the only real reason we are restrained, it's not because of the demand and the lack of interest by Europe, India, or even China. It's simply because we have logistical problems, because we haven't produced that much coal in West Virginia in a long time. And our supply chains remain disrupted. The equipment manufacturers, we have manpower difficulties and manpower challenges, and the transportation sector is struggling too.
Well, that speaks to all the pressure that's been on the supply side of the business. And, those are operational issues. Most of those will eventually get ironed out or just get resolved. But, what most industries and other businesses aren't quite dealing with as we are is that there's a major push, a strong push by the President of the United States to move away from fossil energy. And that just adds a dimension of concern and adds to the challenge, of mining the commodity.
Absolutely, Chris. And it hangs, I characterize it as hanging a drape around what would otherwise be a great deal of enthusiasm, given again record worldwide demand for our product. It makes it hard for those in the industry every day to have enthusiasm about what they do. And I think it really, really challenges us from a recruiting standpoint to get the new workforce or the expanded workforce that we so desperately need. And I think it hurts us at the financing option when we have to go to banks to borrow, what may be short-term or long-term capital, with mining being so capital intensive. Every single headline that's broadcast every evening and every single headline that blasts you in the face when you open up a web browser is the end of coal. Well, the problem is somebody needs to tell the rest of the world that, because they certainly don't see it that way.
That's a good point. If I'm not mistaken, world production and consumption both increased last year and are on pace to increase again this year.
They are. And last year,
hitting record highs.
Yeah, last year, to the surprise of I think almost everybody, including those of us in the coal business, worldwide coal consumption hit an all-time record high. So again, the headlines may be one thing, and the wishes of the president or the decarbonization crowd, that's only one voice. The practical reality of making steel and making power around the globe doesn't reflect that. It reflects what we know and we have known in the coal industry in West Virginia forever, that the easiest way and the best way to electrify your economy or to strengthen it by forging really, really strong steel is to use coal. And thankfully, we happen to have some of the best in the world. And it really reflects a whole other, almost an alternative reality, if you will, versus what we confront every day in the media about the end of the coal industry. I read this morning that the regional grid operator that controls the state of Texas is so worried about winter peak load in that state and demand for electricity that they have ordered previously shuttered coal plants to resume electrical generation.
I think I read where Germany was doing the same thing.
Germany has done, and they've actually ordered
Yes.
those plants to actually fire and be ready on standby.
Right, right, no question about it. Everybody's hedging their coal supplies a little bit right now and their fuel supplies, getting ready for a heavier load during the winter months, which we typically experience here as well.
And
It was just last year we had Storm Elliott, less than a year ago, which has really served to alter the narrative that's taken place in Washington, D.C. All of a sudden there's a lot more concern over reliability and over the security of the grid and, system that delivers, household and industrial power throughout the country.
Yeah, it's a welcome wake-up call, Chris, but I think it's somewhat disturbing that it took that level of a crisis. But I think what the country is finally starting to realize, and even more importantly, the folks that have their fingers and their hands on the switches of the electrical grid around this country, this is probably, here in 2023, that's probably the first time since the 1950s that coal wasn't ready and coal-fired power plants weren't on standby and couldn't meet all the dramatic drop-off in natural gas, electric generation, and of course the intermittent sources like wind and solar. Coal's always been there as a backup, but because of some of the regulatory issues we confronted from the federal government, those plants are no longer there. They've been permanently shuttered, and that's really it scared some folks that needed to be a little worried, I think.
Just to back up a little bit, as we are ratcheting down and decreasing the amount of coal that we mine and that we consume nationally, China and India together currently mine 6 times more than we do here.
Yes.
6 times more than what we mine throughout the United States. Think about that for a moment.
And they still have to import coal.
And they still have to import coal, and we're providing some of that, as Australia is and some other major exporting countries. But 6 times more. I mean, that's just an unbelievable amount. I think it's hard to really internalize how much of anything that is, particularly when you're talking about millions and millions of tons of coal.
And because the use, particularly in China, I think maybe India's maturity into an industrial power may allow them to do it a lot more cleanly than what China did. But we all know that coal isn't used in other countries like it is here. And the most basic pollution control equipment on a coal-fired power plant in China or on a blast furnace at a steelmaking factory, they don't exist because China built those facilities to produce power as quickly and most efficiently as possible. And pollution control wasn't high on their list because it reduces the efficiency of those facilities. So for every coal-consuming industrial concern that you close in this country, you haven't gotten rid of the demand for iron or steel or refined metal or plastic or anything else. You've just shipped it offshore. So what you've actually done is probably increased the pollution or the potential for pollution footprint by closing a highly efficient, highly environmentally protective U.S. factory and placed it somewhere where pollution control is not even an afterthought.
Well, I mean, it's one thing to talk about China currently consuming, substantially more coal, on the order of magnitude of 6 times more coal than what we do. But they have as many new coal plants under construction than what we have throughout the United States.
Yes, and they try to commission a new coal-fired power plant almost every month. And I think the exponential growth that's occurring in India, and is going to find themselves situated very similar. Now, maybe through the fact that India's transition to this industrial economy is coming somewhat later, they can do it a little better than China did and build the highly efficient, highly pollution-controlled equipment and plants that China didn't build.
So as we're going through all the pain to ratchet down our fossil energy consumption here throughout America, the end effect is there will likely be a higher level of carbon being emitted because of the growth on the Asian Pacific seaboard.
Yeah, Chris, and the other thing that's somewhat concerning because of where this development's occurring just physically, whether it's China or India, is the world's largest coal exporting state, especially from a thermal perspective, is Indonesia. But the issue, Indonesian coal, it's relatively easy to mine, and it's located pretty close to India and China when you think about it, close proximity, but it's very low quality coal. You have to burn almost 3 times as much Indonesian coal to get the equivalent heat content of, say, a lump of West Virginia coal. So you have countries that are burning less efficient coal in a much more environmentally damaging manner. And I think that's one thing on the global stage that, say, the United Nations or some of these global energy and economic forums should consider is if you truly want to lower the footprint of producing power or steel from coal, then one of the best practical ways to do that is to use better coal. Because India and China or any other developing nation for that matter doesn't have access probably to natural gas and some of the intermittent sources, or they can't rely on them. So they're going to use coal. There's no question it's going to be coal. But could you encourage them to facilitate the use of better coal so that you have less CO2 emissions or less sulfur emissions, but you actually get more power or more steel than you would by using Indonesian coal? I think that's a aspect of the global environmental and energy discussion that's totally ignored, is using better resources to not trying to eliminate one, which is kind of the trip that everybody's been on now for about 20 years. Let's not eliminate it. Let's transition and use it more efficiently, or use coal that's better.
Well, you make a good point with that, and I don't think we talk about or underscore all the improvements that's been made with our combustion of coal here over the last 50 years or so. I mean, it's remarkable the amount of pollutants and airborne constituents that are being removed from the emission stream today. I mean, there's virtually zero emission coming out of these coal-fired plants near us here in West Virginia.
That's absolutely right. Because we have eliminated just about every what we would refer to as priority pollutant, from sulfur dioxide all the way down to these absolutely ridiculously low levels of mercury that would otherwise come out of a smokestacks. But we've done things in the last 20 years that 30 years ago no industrial engineer thought was possible with respect to pollution control equipment.
And we've had our regional EPA administrator in here saying that all, really complimenting the state and issuing some type of a certificate or proclamation of how the state's plants were fully compliant.
Yep, and how for the first time probably in 40 years we're in compliance with regional ambient air quality standards. And the fact that we were able to obtain that allows for new development to come to West Virginia, because you have a greater budget for newer emissions. And I think, again, that's just a discussion that's totally glossed over day to day when you talk about energy and the environment.
Some good news, I know there's been a lot of investment around the state. There's been literally billions of dollars of investment in the new mining operations, particularly up in the north central, but a few in the southern part of the state.
Absolutely, Chris. It's really remarkable when you think about it. But since about 2020, some of this started during the pandemic, is we have spent collectively as an industry about $6.1 billion either building brand new operations or significantly retooling operations and complexes that were idled. We commissioned, about 6 months ago, I think, a brand new mining complex in Wyoming County, West Virginia. And I think there were some of us in the coal industry that thought we'd never see that day again. But the same thing's true up north, as you mentioned. We have a brand new operation that about 9 months ago loaded its first unit train. Totally new development from the ground up, about $1 billion of total investment. And to your point earlier, Chris, that argues against the narrative that we confront and public policymakers confront about coal being a dying resource. Again, somebody needs to tell the investors and the energy users that are spending this kind of money to develop these operations in West Virginia. We're really building the next generation of the coal industry in West Virginia right now.
And still looking for workers.
Absolutely.
No question. I know we've had some discussions with President Gee and Dean Mago up at West Virginia University about strengthening the mining program up there. We were talking yesterday that we come across some figures that showed, the 8 or 9 engineering schools, are graduating between 150 and 200 mining engineers a year. But yet there's there's a need for about 500 or 600, 2.5 times what's being graduated.
Yeah.
So there's a there's a concern there, and just based on the back of the envelope analysis that we did with some of our members, it shows 700-800 positions within the industry, mainly at the mine level, that could be filled tomorrow.
Absolutely, Chris. And I think that's a big concern. Right now, like we were talking earlier, one of the things that we confronted in 2022 with record demand was transportation and equipment difficulties. But the issue of manpower is a long-term chronic problem that I think will haunt this next generation of the coal industry that we're trying to build. If we can't find the highly skilled blue-collar workers that we need to physically extract the coal, and we can't get the highly technical, what we would typically refer to as professional engineers, environmental technicians, geologists, surveyors, that's a problem that'll be tough to overcome, because it's one that you'll deal with for years. The railroads, the transportation difficulties, the equipment and supply chain, as you mentioned, that's going to work itself out naturally, I think. But hopefully. But the inability to attract this talent, that's going to be a problem that'll haunt us.
It may make sense for us to get with Commerce and maybe Economic Development, Workforce West Virginia, and because of not just for our industry, but seems to be a problem across many industries and businesses right now. Just take a ride downtown Charleston. Every single store, from retail to every restaurant, has a help wanted sign in the window. But your major industries, we have several new industries coming into the state. We have our Roads to Prosperity program in full development or full speed right now. We're making new roads, repairing roads, building bridges statewide. And, oil and gas is doing pretty well. It just seems like there's a lot of options for individuals, for blue-collar workers today. And, the need's going to probably get worse over the next decade or so.
Absolutely.
In fact, it's so large, I think the need is so large that it warrants the state to become a little more involved and develop a state strategy for recruiting, attracting workers to West Virginia.
Yeah, I think, Chris, this rises to the level of, I'm not going to say a crisis, maybe not a big crisis, but it's certainly a developing crisis. And that may, again, as we look out, where you and I see the billions of dollars being spent to build the next generation, the next 100 years of coal extraction in West Virginia, but the ability to do that being compromised by the lack of an available workforce, that's about the future of the state of West Virginia. That's about severance tax collections. That's about your population. That's about your local taxes and everything that the coal industry funds. So the state of West Virginia, I think, really needs to start paying attention to that. We spent the money. We are continuing spending the money to invest, to mine here for another 100 years. Mm-hmm. But we can't do that if we can't find the qualified workforce to do it.
And changing that narrative can only help also. That narrative that you correctly point out that suggests that maybe coal won't be part of West Virginia's future. We know it will be. And, there's just great opportunity here. Everything from having a balanced portfolio, really progressive and solid, companies involved within the industry here today. These are household names, most of our members. Then you have this, elaborate infrastructure system in place, to mine and to move the coal around. It totals or equals 50-some thousand people that show up every day at a West Virginia coal mining site or at an operation that supports those sites.
Truly remarkable industrial ecosystem.
Yes, it really is. There's no question about that. But we're in the process of looking for the next generation of workers. So, tell me a little bit about Friends of Coal. We want to encourage more and more people to become part of Friends of Coal, and it's just to show your support for the industry and to have your voice. It's a place where your voice can be heard also.
Yeah, Chris, that's a program that was started several years ago. Excuse me. But one that we're looking to revamp, and we might have to dedicate another episode to. But it all drives back to the point that you mentioned earlier about trying to change the narrative. Friends of Coal is a way, I think, for the folks that live in our communities, that work at our mines or depend on the coal production for a job and a livelihood, to stand up and be counted, make their voices heard, and then we take that and convert it into action in an effort to change the narrative.
Well, you have a strong fraternity of people that really enjoy what they do, and they do it masterfully well, and they do it with great pride and sophistication. And there's no one that's more proud of the work they do than coal miners, particularly here in West Virginia.
Rightfully so.
Well, that's probably a pretty good place to stop here today. Appreciate you coming by. We will dedicate the next program to Friends of Coal. What is Friends of Coal? How do you join? I know we have a website, friendsofcoal.org, that we'd like for people to take a look at some of the information. A lot of that that we talked about, they'll find on there.
Have a good presence on social media if you just look for Friends of Coal.
So appreciate you taking time from your schedule. I know it's pretty hectic and always a big commitment to be able to cut an afternoon off to come down here and talk to us. So appreciate that, and thank you for tuning us in today on the Library Television Network. Have a good day.